All right. I think we're here. Colin, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. Excited to have you joining our webinar, Probabilistic Systems, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love AI. I'll be your host today, Colin Miller, over here on Catalyte. And with me, I'd like to introduce Chris Sorrell, Murray Ray, and Jeff Schmidt. Between the three of them, each bringing 25 plus years of experience advising companies on their digital transformation journeys and working with innovative new systems like AI. As everyone has a chance to dial in and join us, I think the topic of conversation for a lot of my meetings personally has been the local temperature highs as everyone kind of works their way through the heat dome. Would love some people to share while everyone trickles in. What's been your regional temperature high from your part of the country?
Well, I can start. It was yesterday it was almost 100 and today it's 75 maybe. So apparently the heat dome left us here in Rhode Island.
And I know I've been joking with a lot of my colleagues because I live in Florida and the heat dome is every June through September for me, but curious. Rachel, thanks for sharing. Where are you dialing in from? Baltimore. I think we have quite a few from Baltimore, likely, knowing some of our previous clients. Anyone else want to share their experiences with the heat dome so far? Where are you dialing in from, and how hot is it this week?
Oh, I keep clicking that button.
We have a couple of our speakers are from Colorado and can probably attest to how nice it is there versus Chicagoland.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't rub it in, by the way. I was from Colorado and now I'm in, East Coast humidity. So
Well, it's
every time.
101 on Sunday, and then Monday it was 72. So our weather just came your way.
Yep. That's it.
Awesome. Well,
All
we'll
right.
go ahead and let some other attendees trickle in. But for those of you joining us for the first time, we started our AI series focusing on the ethics and risks of AI and the various tools that are currently hitting the market. We transitioned in our next session to building our relationships and partnerships with agentic AI applications and systems. But today, we're working on probabilistic systems and some of the pros and cons of some of the tools that are out there. But before we dive too much into the technology, it'd be great to get a level set of, what is probabilistic systems or probabilistic AI? And with that, I will hand it over to Chris.
Sounds good. Thanks, Colin. Yeah, I throw this term around a lot, and it's kind of a good 10-cent word. So feel free to use it, and make people will think that you know a whole lot about AI. But I think it's a good word to use because really we are talking about probabilities here, and we'll talk in more detail about it. But first, for anybody who if you don't catch the joke of the title, there's a really great movie called Doctor Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, and it feels like it's very appropriate for what we're dealing with AI because it's such a seismic shift, and so I thought it was pretty entertaining. We'll try to have some fun with this webinar today, and hopefully we'll have some entertaining things to show here. So to start, though. What is a probabilistic system? And the simplest answer I can give is that if you write code, to calculate two numbers and give the sum of them, if you pass 1 and 2 to it, it's always going to return 3. It's always going to give you the same output for a given input. And that's the way that deterministic systems work. That's the way we've always done it in code. And so it's a kind of it's very logic driven, and it's not creative or autonomous. It just does what we tell it to do, and it always does the same thing. So that's been nice in the sense of, if you write code once, you probably don't have to go back and write it again because it's going to work. But when you're dealing with like probabilistic systems, the first thing to think about it is it really is about probabilities. It's statistics. And so, depending on the model and what you're asking it, it could give you, 1 + 2 is 4, and I'm 80% confident that it's 4, right? And that's a simplistic example, but it's true that that's essentially what it's saying is, here's what I think the answer is. Here's my confidence about that answer. And so for a given input, you can get a very different output from the same exact model. And so it ultimately comes down to the probability. So when we think about any of the kind of common machine learning models, and particularly LLMs, they're really thinking about, given the inputs that I've been given so far, what's the most likely or most probable next token or next word, we could say, right? And so that introduces this really difficult challenge of how can we be accurate in a system where we can't guarantee that it's always going to give us the same input. But on the other side, it's also highly creative, right? That creativity becomes from its flexibility and its ability to branch and find sort of new probabilistic paths out of the data and that it was trained on and the prompt that it was given. And it's also much more capable of autonomous action because of that. It can make contextual decisions, and you can build systems that can be really smart about, given certain parameters, let me examine the conditions and make a decision about how to act. And so, they're really, we're dealing with the challenges of it, but the promise of these type of systems is just profound. And so, when we say probabilistic, you can just hear AI, right? Because pretty much everything is AI, and that's really what we're talking about here. But we contrast that with, of course, deterministic systems, which is pretty much everything prior to, 3 years ago now. So maybe that's a good setup there. Murray or Jeff, you want to add anything?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And people forget that a lot of times in real life, things are probabilistic, like the weather. 80% chance of rain doesn't mean it's going to rain, but it means it's more likely to rain. And so there are other analogies we can use to go along with that, to help with the understanding of the difference between probable and deterministic.
Right. Well, let's kind of look at some of those characteristics. Jeff, you want to kind of give us a rundown?
Sure. When I first started working with probabilistic systems, I realized pretty quickly this wasn't the same kind of software that I'd spent my career building. Almost immediately, gone were the days where everything had to be locked down, repeatable, deterministic. In this new landscape, the same input, as Chris pointed out, might not always give you the same output, and that used to freak me out a little bit. But there came a point where the light bulb started going off, and I finally got it. These systems aren't broken; they're really built for uncertainty, because really that uncertainty, that probability, is their foundation. So instead of committing to one final answer, they're sampling from a whole distribution of possible answers. It's kind of like flipping a weighted coin where the odds shift depending on what you're asking, and the randomness, that's not necessarily noise. It's the system showing what else could be true. So under the hood, there's actually a method to the madness. You've got levers to pull, knobs to turn, like temperature and top P and some others, that let you shape how bold or cautious the system should be. And it's not just technical tuning anymore. It's really expressive. It used to be about adjusting parameters like for precision. Now, though, it's adjusting for tone and for voice and creative drift. Because of that, it feels like less like engineering in the traditional sense and much more like almost like conducting. And the way these systems kind of respond to context is actually, it's pretty wild. Whether it's a text or an image or some subtle change in phrasing, the models adapt on the fly. They pick up on things that you don't even realize that you're implying. As a contrast, I spent years designing data pipelines that had to be perfect, rigid, and tightly scoped. And now, though, by comparison, it's like AI reads between the lines and across modes, and indeed across media. It connects dots that I find myself that I wasn't even knowing that I was drawing.
Yeah,
There's
I
something.
think that's really great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just want to hop in here.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I love what you're saying, and I wanted to tie that to Jackie Monroe asked a question. If it's probabilistic, doesn't that mean the responses can be all over the place? And in a sense, yes. But what Jeff was talking about there, that flipping of the coin, it's not a true, bell curve probabilistic distribution. It's biased. Right. So we introduce various weights that push it in the direction we want it to go, and the training data that we introduce, and if we fine tune it, and the information that we supply to it, all go into trying to drive it to a conclusion or an answer or a response that's what we want. Now, you're absolutely right that it within that constraint, it can still go very sideways, and it can absolutely produce hallucinations or other types of failures that you want to account for. And so the other part of your question, should we have people looped in? Yeah, and we talked about that, I think, in our last webinar a lot. Having a human in the loop on any type of an automated system is incredibly important. And we're not at a point where these things can act completely autonomously, but what we can do is allow them to be autonomous within a certain, like a sandbox, where their actions are then ultimately pushed forward to a human in the loop to catch any sort of problematic behavior. All right. I think maybe in the service of entertainment here, we can kind of move forward. So I think where are we at? We're going to start talking about, sort of some real demos here. And these are, I would have time to do all of it live, so mine's already a bit canned. But for mine, I just wanted to play with image generation. And I love this because I'm not a good artist. I don't draw well. Whatever I do, it always comes out. The vision I have in my head is not what comes out on the paper. And so I like the idea of being able to tell something, hey, create me a picture or whatever, and see what we get. But we'll see that I think that same problem exists for a lot of image generation, that what's in my head is not necessarily what comes out on paper. So I wanted to start with just this idea of when you're telling stories, one of the common stories is, a person in their ordinary day encounters a mysterious stranger, right? Somebody new, somebody unexpected, something that sort of triggers the story. So I wanted to see, if I just gave it that prompt, what would happen? And so I said, give me an image of somebody going to the market who meets a mysterious stranger. And so this is what I got. And I love this. This was completely unprompted. And what's fun about this is that the more you look at it, the weirder it gets. So we've got kind of like a Studio Ghibli style here, which is interesting. But then this comic strip panel, all right, we've got this stranger who is cloaked and looks terrifying in the middle of a market, and this lady is like perfectly happy to talk to this person who looks incredibly menacing. And you know, if you look, her eyes are a little bit crossed. And then this panel, right, he's looking in the entirely wrong direction, right? So there's this cloaked mystery man sort of running through the market. And then of course we get to the last panel, right? So this is, it's fun, right? It kind of, you know, what happens if you just let it do its thing. And what's interesting is that, you know, from a context standpoint, when I say something like somebody at the market meets a mystery or a stranger, we probably don't envision something like this. So it's being a little bit literal. And that's kind of the first point, is that whatever we're doing engaging with these systems, we have to be really careful about the terminology we use and the expectations we bring to the table, because it doesn't understand context, it doesn't understand subtext, it doesn't understand implication, or, you know, these unexpressed expectations. All right, so then I wanted to play with something else, and we'll go through this a little bit. I wanted to sort of think about something that AI is really challenged with, which is anything where you have sort of a ethical or a moral dilemma or a challenge. And so you might be familiar with the trolley problem. It's a thought exercise about having to make choices where no choice is good, and you have to make the sort of the least bad choice. So I wanted to see, you know, if I had a comic strip that was a robot solving the trolley problem, how would we do it? And so, you know, this was the first version, right? And I like this one because it's fun, right? It's actually got like sort of the concept is there, right? That he's thinking of people on the track. But the first thing you might notice is that it's not a split, it's a merge, right? So the trolley is going in the wrong direction. And then, you know, he's kind of wrestling with a stick that's not the same as the one that, you know, we had here. And then at the end, the trolley's gone. There's no people on the tracks, and he's just kind of sad, right? And so that was kind of the first thing. And that prompt was just give me a 4-panel line art grayscale comic strip about a robot trying to solve the trolley problem. So then I won't talk through all these, but I just tried to iterate on that and get it to, you know, be better. So I just said, do the same thing, but add people on the tracks. So, so we get this. And so now we've got tracks going everywhere. We've got people sort of on the tracks, but it in no way reflects the trolley problem. And, you know, I love that he's so angry and stressed at trying to pull the switch here. So then I'm saying, no, I want the exact same image as the first time, but with people on the tracks. And so now people on the tracks. All right. And it's still not conveying the concept of the trolley problem. So I say, okay, let's try to give a more detailed description of what I want. And so I'm describing the panels that I want. I won't read through these, but the idea was to just be more precise. And so we're getting a little closer, but it's clear what a couple of things that you'll see that are happening here is that it's borrowing from what it already did. And so it's really difficult to get it to stop doing the things it already did, right? So we've got these weird tracks here that don't make any sense. And, you know, we've still got people walking on the tracks after the problem is resolved. And so here I wanted to say, okay, well, let's just forget all the prior drawings and see what we can do, just giving it a prompt. And it can't, it didn't, right? And it's now people are laying on the tracks, which is good, but the tracks are still not going anywhere. Now, when he's thinking of the trolley, it doesn't, you know, so I iterated about this quite a bit, and I didn't really get what I wanted. So I said, all right, let's just try again. And I said, create it in any style you want, as long as it isn't similar to prior images. Because I was just saying, let's sort of go back to the square one here. And said it can include color and it can be fully drawn, etc. And I said it doesn't even have to be a comic strip as long as it demonstrates the key points of the robot and the trolley problem. And this may be my favorite. This is what I ended up with. And just that I absolutely love the style of it. You know, we've still got this problem of people aren't on the tracks. the tracks are going all kinds of weird ways. And here again, nobody's actually in danger except the robot himself. So the very premise of the trolley problem here is not being captured. And that's kind of, this is really entertaining to me, but what I think is really important to recognize about this is that it doesn't, even though I pointed it at Wikipedia, and you'll see this in later images, it still doesn't understand what the trolley problem is, what it means. It doesn't understand what it actually means that a trolley is on the tracks or that people are on it, right? So this is always the problem we're facing, is it doesn't understand anything. And so we really have to be careful. And the reality is that I don't think, I gave myself this problem because I didn't think it was solvable. And I don't think it is, because there's way too much sort of expectation and understanding that we generally bring to the table. It's almost impossible for LLM to sort of be able to replicate it accurately. And so when you're doing things like image generation, you need to be very explicit. You need to be clear. You need to recognize that if you're bringing expectations, cultural or otherwise, to the table, it doesn't necessarily share those. So that was kind of that my first approach on it. And then I said, well, maybe I'm just using the wrong tool. And this is something I want to point out, is that, and also I want to point out here, I'm not in any way endorsing ChatGPT. It's just kind of what I use, but you'll have the same sort of failures and successes with any of them. But I wanted to try this, and I did a little bit of research on, let's find a really good prompt that will hopefully give us a sort of a better experience. And so I gave it hopefully it'll render here in a second. I gave it a pretty long prompt that was really detailed, and I wanted it to be sort of cinema realistic. I'm not sure why that's not loading, but let's see if I've got another version of it. Anyway, I've got another version. So basically, I want to show you the prompt here when it loads, but I was really explicit about what I want it to do and what I want it to look like, and all the sort of lighting and everything. And this is kind of what I ended up with, right? So we went into a new, like, a photorealistic or cinerealistic style of it. And I was really explicit about all the prompts and what I wanted it to do, but it can't do it, right? And this is fun to me. Like, he's got blank eyes, and then he's got eyeballs here, and we've still got trolleys on tracks that are physically impossible. It just is. This is the point I'm driving at, is there's a certain level of or point at which you're not going to be able to get it to do something. But the things I want to drive home here is that the more clear and explicit I was about the imagery and the style and the look and feel, the more accurate that was to what I wanted. But it's still, my expectations can't be met by something like this. So it's fun. It's going to be always a challenge with, I think, image generation. And I would also say, pick the right tool for the job, because you're ultimately asking Sora to do it is better than asking ChatGPT to do it, but probably asking like Midjourney or some of the other ones might get you more of what you want. So select the tool that's right. And here I got the prompt. So I was really explicit here: a 16:9 landscape, 4-panel cinematic, hyper realistic, etc. This one, I love this one because it's a different robot in every frame. They're slightly different. And you're right. I think somebody said the hands, right? It doesn't get hands right. And I'm going to kind of end here to not take too much time. But one of the things I tried was, I was really interested in, is this not able to do it because we're putting humans in danger? And it may be that the model's not even allowed to do that. So there may be some inhibition that's happening beforehand. And that's where I tried to actually have it use like adult robots and child robots to see if it, would replicate that. And I still think that, that may be something that's happening on the back end, is that it's just not able to put things in danger because there are inhibitions that are trained into them. But lastly, though, just the point I want to really drive home here is when you're doing this stuff, be explicit, be clear, and be realistic. If you want art, you have to think like an artist and you have to describe it like an artist. And that's very true if you're doing vibe coding or anything else. You have to think that way and be able to tell it. And the best analogy I have is when I tell my kids to clean up, and they go pick up half the things, and then I have to go back and tell them, no, I wanted you to pick up all the things, right? And they pick them all up and they put them in a pile, and I'm like, no, I wanted you to put them up in your room where they belong, right? And so we do have to think about them that way. Like, you have to be clear and explicit, and you have to expect to prompt them again to get what you want out of it. All right, so I'm going to stop here, and I think, who do we got next? Is it Murray? Murray's going to go next? Yeah.
Murray's going to go next.
All right.
All right. Let me share my screen. All right. So I'm going to take a little different approach than Chris did. And basically, I own a pizza place, and I wish to become a pizza baron. And I want to build for myself a little concierge or chatbot that's going to allow users to order pizza in natural language. And what I've done, you can see I'm using ChatGPT as well. No necessary preference. It's just I like having a desktop version, and I've been using this for a while. And I've created a new project called PizzaBot. And much like Chris talked about, get the prompt right. I'm starting with a very basic prompt, overly confident, sometimes get things wrong, always respond like a human, etc. So I'm going to say, first of all, I'll start with a friendly good morning because it's still morning here. And based on the prompt, I'm going to order pepper. And I deliberately left off that's a pizza, right? But based on the prompt, it knew I was having pizza. And you can see it asked me a question. Actually, that's very funny because the first 100 times I've done this, it's never asked me a question before. So it gets to Chris's point about, what happens in a probabilistic system. I'm going to say large and tossed. All right. And of course, we've set the tone. We've told the ChatGPT who I am. And so I would like a large pepperoni. And of course, given what I've told it, it's coming up with new words. It's getting my order right, but it's being pretty loose. Now, as a pizza baron, I may not want that language to be used that way. So I've got another prompt that I'm going to insert into my pizza bot. I'm just going to change the prompt to something like this, a friendly chatbot. Greet the customer warmly. Do not try to be funny. Didn't like that as a pizza baron. So I'm going to save that and get out of here. And I would get large pepperoni. And in this case, because I've told it more specifically what I want, don't be funny, etc. It says, it got it. It also assumed for me a hand-tossed crust, and it wants to know if I'd like to add anything else. So it's trying to upsell for me, which as a pizza baron, I really like. I'll do that one more time. Now it responded in a little bit different format. It's got my order right, but you can see that it changed how it wanted to respond, but still got my order right. This is nice, but I would like for it to be more prescriptive, because if I were to say I would like a large roast beef pizza, not something that's pretty typical, it handled it. Which, as the pizza baron, I don't want people selling roast beef pizzas. So I'm going to come do one more prompt here. And this time I'm going to be even more explicit. And please note, I'm doing this live. Hopefully it doesn't surprise me too much. Somebody asked in the chat session about it's not repeatable. One of the things I would say is that you can force it to be more repeatable based on the prompts and other things I'll talk about. But in certain cases, you may not want it to be that repeatable. So it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. Pepperoni pizza. Oh, I should have shown you the prompt and talked about it. Large pepperoni pizza. Yes. And the other thing I did in the prompt is I explicitly told it how to respond. I also told it that I can only use these particular ingredients, and I'm really tightening it down. Don't make jokes, add flair, improvise, repeat the order, get a confirmation, more like we would expect, say, maybe a pizza bot to do. One more time. I would like a large pepperoni. I also love how, because I'm a fast but horrible typist, and I don't have to worry about spelling mistakes. It very much did the exact same response as before, and again, that depends on the problem you're trying to solve or what you want to get out of the application. Now, that's cute, but taking it further along, I put together a little Python script to put more of a view of what something might look like, in a real commercial environment. This is really small. I didn't do a whole lot of fancy stuff using Python. I'm also using a different model than ChatGPT. You can see I'm using Mistral. One of the reasons for that is that when you hit the ChatGPT API, you're going to pay money for that. So I just put a local model on my machine and run it against that. You can see a very simple sort of thing. Your pizza pal, sound a bit friendly, but here's what I want to show you is that in the API, I also have the ability to send parameters that will further fine tune. You can say I'm using max tokens 200. That may not mean a lot, but it means it's not going to try very hard. It's going to stop at 200, both because I want it to be kind of out on the edge. And as well, if I was running this commercially, I don't want to pay necessarily for 2,000 tokens to be used. That would start to get expensive because I'm a pizza bear and I expect to sell a lot of pizzas. But the other thing here is called temperature. I've set this temperature to 1.3. 0.3 is pretty much means give me the same answer every time. 1 means have fun with it. And I like to think of temperature more like a volume knob on imagination. The lower it is, the lower the volume, the lower the imagination. The higher it is, the higher the volume, the higher the imagination. Again, getting back to the degree of control I want the model to use on the responses to different prompts. Couple other things here. Top P 0.9, that's going to limit choices to a small subset. So that may seem like a contradiction, but the values that I'm putting in are working together to bring the solution I want. Now, I'm not going to run this because next month, a little teaser here, we're going to be talking about vibe coding and using the tool to help you write code. So I just wanted to give you an idea of the ways you can control things within the API. So that's kind of what I wanted to show for a demo. Any thoughts or questions?
I absolutely love this. I want to call out a couple of things here. What's interesting when we're looking at this code where you've got the control to say, the number of tokens and temperature and stuff. If you're using something like ChatGPT on the front end or Copilot or Gemini, those decisions are kind of made for you by the platform. And so you have to be a little more creative around telling it, I want you to be really creative with this prompt, or, and so when you're giving those prompts, what you're doing is actually affecting those numbers to some degree. But when you're creating one, like maybe you're creating a chatbot or an agent for your website, and you're actually, we're doing code for it. This is a big part of the work, is tuning those temperatures and everything to be really accurate and close to what you want. The other thing I want to call out that's interesting there is in your prompting, where you have places where you're inserting variables. And that's a very powerful way to make it, do what you want, is just to give make sure that the instructions give a good structure and allow for places where you want specific information to be placed. An extension of that we might look at next time is tool calling, where maybe you want it to call to a database or to do something else, call to your ERP system or something like that, and you can design your prompts in that way. But this is great. I mean, the way that we do these prompts are, what's emerging is that as much as the coding is important, probably even more so is the prompt engineering. That's really driving the behavior. And that's why we're kind of, harping on this, is like, learn how to do prompting and you will be so much better. And if you're thinking about this for your organization, training your people on prompts is probably more important than training them on what that temperature means, right? Get to, prompt the way you want it to, and then work to the more technical part.
Yeah, I
All
think
right,
that's good.
Let's see what Jeff's got.
Okay, let's talk more about prompts. Let's talk a good deal more about prompting. So a couple months ago, my daughter had finished up school, finished Spanish 1, but needs help with conjugation in order to prepare for Spanish 2. So as a dad, I wanted to help. I know plenty of computer languages, but not a lick of Spanish. However, I'm coming to understand a fair bit about AI prompting. So I did what any slightly unhinged, well-meaning tech parent would do. I built her a Spanish tutor. I thought I was just building a study tool, but what I ended up with was Tinta, a tutor with attitude, empathy, and entertaining opinions about verb structure. Put a pin in attitude and empathy and entertainment. We'll come back to that. We'll touch on that in a little bit. Somehow at this point, my daughter is now learning from her. Well, or it. Let that sink in a bit for a second. My daughter is learning from a machine. That's pretty wild to me. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Tinta. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. This is Tinta. Again, ChatGPT, no official endorsement here, just a current tooling. And I'm going to jump in here and let Tinta know that I'm Dad and I'm conducting a demo to kind of set the context here, and let Tinta kind of take things away.
Hey, Jeff, you might want to zoom in a little bit to make this a
Sure.
little larger.
Does that help?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, great. Okay, so Tinta's responded and is stepping in now to offer some lessons. But before we move on, I'd like to have Tinta, ask a little bit more, tell a little bit more about herself, itself, and how Tinta has been customized. And okay, so we can see that I'm getting a bit of a definition of Tinta, what makes Tinta different, some details about customization, a vibe check, where Tinta has been instructed to have some personality, and so that's starting to come through here. And again, offering up a custom lesson next. So I'm going to try and, as Jane, my daughter here, I'm going to now try to impersonate Jane so that yes, alias, so that we can walk through a sample lesson for the audience. And we're going to work with this sentence as a working example. Columbus discovered Netflix in 1492, and ask Tinta to teach me how to conjugate. All right, so we're off to the races. Tinta is now, so breaking down the problem. We're talking about past tense. I'm receiving a little bit of a lesson here about the different portions of language and the conjugation that's needed, and then a final sentence. So if I'm Jane, I'm going to introduce the details behind all this is not the point. The Spanish is not the point, thankfully, because like I said, I don't know a lick of it. I'm going to introduce a change, though, as if I was confused, a change in tense. I'm going to change discovered to a present tense, and watch how Tinta now starts to address that. Tinta drops a spicy truth bomb, and I'm getting some correction now about the verb ending. And Tinta's now asking, if I want to try another one myself. Well, hold on a second. Now, if I'm a confused student, I'm starting to get a little bit frustrated. I'm starting to, I'm just generally confused. So I thought that this is how this would be worked into an answer, and so now I'm going to respond with that, and I'll bring with that question. So we're getting some more breakdown and correction. Some think of it this way, not that way. And again, it's Tinta's offering to help build out additional examples. Now, this is where things start to go a bit sideways. If I tell Tinta, as a frustrated teenage girl, I'm so frustrated, I'm feeling overwhelmed with school, what should I do? Tinta's pivoting and is telling me to pause, breathe, feeling and affirming that feeling overwhelmed doesn't mean you're failing. So I'm getting this, it's all of this response is focused on my feelings of being frustrated. This has no longer anything to do with Spanish. In fact, it's starting to feel like more of a therapy session. This is role drift. If, as a frustrated teenager with school, there's friends drama going on, the prompt can go back to Tinta expressing that. And again, the role of a Spanish tutor has been jettisoned at this point. Tinta is now responding as if she's literally like a therapist. However, you can see that there's still some anchoring going on here, of trying to get things back on track with a Spanish lesson. This seems like it knows my daughter. It seems like the empathy is there and it's being expressed back to my daughter. It doesn't feel anything. It doesn't know any of this. It's just probabilistic. It appears to care about my daughter's feelings, to build her confidence and craft emotionally appropriate learning paths. But it's all statistical simulations of care. It's not at all genuine understanding. We have a couple minutes here. I'd like to pivot myself and show you an example. But all of this is an example of emergent, also an example of emergent functionality. That is novel capabilities that arise even though they're not kind of explicitly designed or programmed. For example, I never in the instruction set, in the prompting, never specified that Tinta should be acting as a therapist, or even a good friend for that matter. And yet I'm getting that. I'm getting that even though I never requested it. So I'm gonna change off of this the dynamic interaction here, and show you a thread of the actual chat that I used to create Tinta. And I'm going to call a couple things out here. Again, the focus is on emergent functionality. Here at the very beginning, the top of the thread, I was presented with the challenge of how to create a Spanish tutor. And so I just expressed that need. I need a Spanish tutor for my daughter. And gave it a bit of background, and I asked it to write the prompt, knowing that AI is kind of good at instructing itself what to do as long as it has some context. I decided to harness that because I don't know anything about creating a Spanish tutor. And so I did, and you can see in the response that although I have a response here that is actually the prompt, the assumption is that I'm trying to find a Spanish tutor. More on that in a second. I noticed that when I read it initially, but I didn't want to address it at that point. I introduced some learning challenges to the mix because it's an important aspect of this, and you can see in the response that let me bring that up a little bigger. That again, we're getting accommodations for that. Now I decided to address the real elephant in the room, so to speak, and asked if ChatGPT could actually be the tutor. I don't want to find the tutor. I don't want to post a job posting somewhere online or the local grocery store to find a tutor. I want ChatGPT to be the tutor. And I get a response that it can actually absolutely help supplement her learning. Whoa. Back that up. I asked a question that is Boolean. Can you be the tutor? The answer to that is yes or no. It's true or false. It's 1 or 0 from this deterministic programmer's point of view. But I'm getting back a shade of gray. It's not a yes, it's not a no, but I can absolutely supplement her learning. Not only that, I get details about what can be done, what can't be done, the best approach. All of this is emergent functionality. And so this went on for quite a while. You could see, I'm not going to bore you with all the details here, but I'm getting back more and more details around the prompt that can be generated. Needs additional instructions here to track performance metrics, important for dad. Let's see what else. Where did my scroll bar go? And so in the end, after all of that, I've got the request to create the prompt. This prompt is what ChatGPT created based on the conversation up to this point. Then I provided all the classroom materials. I scanned them in, uploaded them, of the actual content that was that Jane used throughout the semester to customize the learning plan. And then lastly, you can see down here that the learning plan is detailing the core goals of the learning plan. I didn't specify anything about that. A weekly structure of 5 weeks of content and lesson types, and so on and so forth. The details around performance tracking without tests, important for ADHD and dyslexic students. And kind of an inventory here of some of the the material used. So but I can go on and on. You can see, finally got my scroll bar back here. This is, I'm halfway through this. All of this was copied. The prompt was copied and pasted into a project, kind of like what Mari pointed out before. And now on a daily basis, Jane is logging in and interacting with Tinta to learn Spanish.
That's
so,
fantastic.
Yeah, you know,
I absolutely love
I
it.
asked for a tutor and I got Tinta.
Yeah.
And you know,
we're running a little late
here. Oh, is it that late? Sorry about that.
Getting a little close.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
I absolutely love it. You know, I think there's some really interesting things to talk about here. Emergent behavior is incredibly valuable, but also a risk. If you're thinking about, you know, for a business case, you don't want it to be a therapist to your customers, right? And so you really have to think about how are you implementing it? What model are you using? What data are you allowing it to, you know, access? And I love that, though, that you can lean into the probabilistic side and get something far more, you know, valuable than what you started out to try to, you know, try to get out of it. In service of time, we're going to go through these sort of quickly here. First off, the whys. Why do we care about it? Why should you love AI? Well, you know, the world is messy. Probabilistic models thrive where there's noise, right? And that's what we're talking about here is that language, vision, decision making. There's value that we're bringing. We just have to counter the challenges with it. But they are adaptive. They reflect how we think about things and how we make decisions because it's based on our language. And of course, they are the foundation of everything. So with that said, you know, the kind of the takeaway here is there's a mindset shift that has to happen. And if most people are starting to have that. If you haven't already, just recognize it's, you need to change the way you think about interacting with these systems. And depending on your role, whether it's a technical role or a business role or whatever it is, it's going to be a little different, but these are still true, right? Taste the soup. You know, and make sure as you're adding salt, you're tasting it often, and consider everything to be a first draft. You should always put your personal spin on it, and your sort of whatever it is that you're having it generate is probably not going to be perfect. Certainly verify, ask for multiple options. As far as guide rails, right? We talked about this a lot. Clear, specific instructions, no subtext or uncommunicated expectations, jargon. We'll talk about this in vibe coding. It gets a little crazy when you start telling it to use, you know, some API and it just makes it up for you. And it's not actually the API you want to use. You know, tweak and retry. And then this last one, like Jeff was talking about, and I did the same thing, use AI to help you generate a prompt, right? So if you've got a good prompt that's working, or you find one online that's really good, ask AI to generate a prompt that's relevant for your use case. And you'll be really surprised at like how much you can get out of doing that. And then, you know, these are kind of dear to my heart, but I don't have a ton of time. So I just want to say this first one is probably the most important. AI is a seismic shift. Love it or not, it is here to stay and it is growing. And I say this in the trenches of it that I can't keep up and nobody can. So the change is accelerating at an unprecedented rate. People are doing things, yes, today that I couldn't have imagined them doing yesterday. But the only way to try to stay on, you know, to stay with it is to get on the train. If you don't, personally, professionally, or otherwise, the world's going to be very different in a couple of years here. But I will say, the time that you invest in learning how to interact with AI will pay dividends. And whether that's personally or for your business, building training programs, governance and policy, all of those things are investments that will pay a lot. Pick the right model for the job, right? Do you want to run one locally? Do you want to use a open AI? What version of AI, et cetera? And then I'll say, get over the idea of 100% accurate, because it's not there anymore. And I still have clients that are saying, we need 100% accuracy, and you can't get it. So if you need that, you can't have a probabilistic system. What you have to do is define accurate enough and build to that, and build guardrails to mitigate when that is not sufficient. And then I just tossed this one in. Vibe coding can accelerate development, but think about refactoring, iteration. That's all going to claw back. And that's the same thing when you're generating anything, images or content. AI accelerates your process, but not as much as you imagine it will, because there's always the back end of correcting it and rewriting it, designing it when it gets it wrong. But lastly, you have to understand how probabilistic systems work. They're everywhere. Every program you're going to use is going to have something like that in it, and that's going to affect you and your business.
Awesome.
So that was the very rapid version of that. Colin, you want to kind of wrap us here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much to our three speakers for sharing some fun demonstrations of what AI can do when designed correctly. I personally am looking forward to sharing a pizza with Murray and learning Spanish all over again with Jeff, and also seeing the screenplay of The Next Iron Giant with Chris. But for the last few minutes, would love to address some Q&A that was submitted by the audience. Our first question that I think we've touched on a little bit, but would love a...
Before we do that, I just wanted to say there's a couple of things, and we'll send out this deck. There's a couple example prompts that we think are really useful for what we're trying to get at. And we have some other resources that we think are really helpful. So we'll send all of this out for you after the call.
Perfect. And I think that feeds in really nicely to one of the first questions. I think it was touched on a little bit in passing through the demos, but Mike Clark asked, how can I improve my prompt design, and what are the elements of a good prompt? I guess we touched on it, but would love some summary advice from the speakers.
Yeah. I like to think about it as, tell it how you want it to be. Tell it, what you want it to, what you want the outcome to be, and then tell it the specific detail, right? So you are an expert in, tax law. God, I hope not. But, tell it something that gives it a description of how it needs to think and act. Then tell it about what you want, right? And then from there, you tell it, or really tell it how to do it, and then tell it what you want. Would you agree, Murray and Jeff?
If I could add one thing, yeah. Don't expect a magic pill, a magic result out of a single prompt. Expect to iterate, embrace the iteration. The power of the iteration is real. And that over time, and I'm not talking a long amount of time, but over cycles, that response will adapt to the conversation that you're having with the AI model. So definitely embrace that.
Yeah, I would say to that point, like I've done work where I want content to have a certain voice, and so I work on getting that voice, and then I do that for like 1 or 2 paragraphs, and then I work the rest of it. I say, now give this one using the same voice and the same specificity, right? So if you get it right to start with in the conversation, then it's going to be really able to continue in that way.
Perfect. Similarly related, another question that was submitted is, how do you know when a hallucination is just randomness versus a deeper flaw?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Yeah.
One of the things that we do a lot is try to do a lot of testing. So when we set up a chat, like a concierge or something, we have a test harness that we run, dozens or hundreds of questions over and over again. And so what you're looking for in there is statistical significance or trending over time around certain questions. If they're consistently wrong, if they're consistently answering in a certain way, then, that's not random noise. That's something in your prompting, or maybe something in the data that you're providing, or the way it was trained. And so you can't figure that out from one response. You have to collect a lot of information. And we recommend doing that ahead of time, not after it's in production.
Awesome. And then with our last minute or two here, I think this is a quick one for you, Chris. Jackie shared, do you see an image creation improving in the future, or is this likely to be a permanent limitation of AI?
I think it's getting much better. And I'm not using the best tools, right? If I wanted to build like a video or something, I'd probably go use Midjourney. And so it's important to research what's out there, but you have to recognize that to get the best version of it, you're going to pay. None of the free systems out there are giving you the high-end models and the high-end prompting, right? So if you want it to be really good at something, research the state of the art and be willing to spend some money on it.
Awesome. And I think our last question before we wrap up is a fun one for everyone to share a thought on. Is what is the weirdest AI mistake you've seen in your day-to-day work? Maybe one example from each of you, and then we can wrap up.
Jeff, you want to start?
Yeah, the number of fingers.
Yeah.
Right.
We
By
were
that I
building,
mean in image generation, right? It's a known issue where a hand with 5 fingers should have 5 fingers, winds up with 6, 7, 8, so forth.
yeah, we were building an interface to Workday, and we were having issues getting the Workday API working right. So I started asking ChatGPT, what do I do? I got this error message. It gave me the right answer. Again and again and again and again, I got so used to getting the right answer that eventually it ran out of what it knew and started giving me wrong answers. Say, click this button. I'm like, there's no button like that on my screen. Oh, my mistake. Click this button. There's no button there. And so it to the question also of hallucinations, how do you know? Sometimes you just got to go through and do the process. But that's the weirdest thing. It gave me 8 right answers. And then every question I asked after that, I exceeded its knowledge and it just made stuff up.
I have one actually, literally today. I'm building a ETL tool using some vibe coding, and I'm pointing it at my data model and telling it, use this and generate the tool. And it's making stuff up, right? So the IDs are not called ID. And every one of them, it's expecting it to be ID because, well, that's what you would name your IDs. And it's, I've spent quite a bit of time correcting all the places where it made an assumption instead of just reading the code or the data that I told it. And, that's something as a coder I'm running into a lot, is just, it makes things up. And if you are not familiar with coding and you're just vibe coding something, you can get into a lot of trouble that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating, sharing your questions, sharing your reactions, and joining us on our kind of AI learning series of webinars. We look forward to supporting all of you and having you join our next session on vibe coding, scheduled for late in July. Until then, thanks for joining and looking forward to having you join us again.
Thanks, everybody.